Believe it or not, there are people that come from all over the world to this area, and Europeans love the history here.
I can remember one couple stopped and asked me, said, "Do they have any idea how all these rocks got like this?" And I said, "Just drive on up the road a ways." I says, "You're going to see this huge gold dredge sitting." And that piece of machinery dug up all of these rocks and spit it out.
The tailings, I think, are kind of cool in the way that, they're historic. People, take them as a point of pride. And now we're working with them to preserve the tailings, but also to, bring the river back to life again and make it a productive fishery again.
The miners and that, they were seeking something that is more valuable to them. Our salmon are hurting because of what was there.
Historically, there were thousands of salmon in Yankee Fork, and early records, I think, suggest maybe 2,000 to 10,000 salmon return to the Yankee Fork annually.
The Yankee Fork Gold Dredge operated periodically from 1940 to 1952. Gold mining provided economic opportunity for Westerners, but had a dramatic effect on this small but important tributary of the Salmon River, located in south-central Idaho.
It's pretty easy to look at Yankee Fork and see that that's not the natural state of the environment. It's fascinating that we had the power to tear up such beautiful country. We need to also recognize that we gotta be cautious with that power.
The rush for gold in the Yankee Fork took some time to develop. Prospectors were busy seeking their fortunes in California and Oregon in the 1850s, while the Yankee Fork remained out of reach for some.
Gold was discovered in Idaho in 1860 in Orofino Creek. That started the gold rush into Idaho. Once in Idaho, they had to venture out to other areas. That's why this area was more or less discovered a little bit later. It was not an easy area to get into. It had brutal winters. It was very remote.
There's a lot of different ways that gold is recovered from the ground. Of course, the easiest, most common way with gold pans, and that was called free gold. Through the thousands and millions of years, these gold deposits up in the mountains have migrated down into the valleys, and they were deposited in the cracks and the rifts of bedrock.
Gold panning transitioned quickly to hydraulic mining, which used the force of water to wash gold from the hillsides.
Where they would build a reservoir, use what's called a hydraulic giant, which is a large nozzle that they would point at the mountainside and blast out all the rock and soil, and use a sluice box mechanism to gather the gold.
Miners' thirst for gold drove them underground to dig for ore. Often called hard rock mining, they tunneled deep into the hillsides and toiled in dark, damp, and dangerous conditions to cut raw ore free from the earth.
It was very difficult work. It was hard work. It was a lot of cold, dark, dusty mine shafts. They were long days. They ended up working from morning till night. And most of their day was spent in that mine shaft, and they didn't come out of the mine shaft until the end of the day.
Mining development also brought growth. As miners and machinery arrived, businesses grew. In 1880, the tiny towns of Custer and neighboring Bonanza swelled to 600 residents, adding a post office, school, blacksmith, dentist, and dance hall. Rock-crushing stamp mills were erected to crush ore and hauled by teams of oxen and mules out of the valley. The General Custer mine extracted gold worth an estimated $8 million during its first decade of operation, the equivalent of nearly $200 million today.
Well, mining was one of the first big business, big capital kind of things that occurred in this area. That brought a lot of money in. And, it did that. The towns developed, around these mines, the stores, the different support services. A lot of the roads were built, to support the mines, like Custer and Bonanza.
There weren't a lot that were employed by the mines. There were more employed in support businesses that basically supported the mines, whether it be store owners, shopkeepers, livery stables.
One of the biggest industries that supported the mining boom was the timber industry. And there was extensive logging which occurred throughout this valley to support not only the houses and all of the shops in town, but the mills, and then also to power the steam engines located at the General Custer Mill, and to build support braces for tunnels and adits.
Just like in any mining community, there were periods of boom and bust.
So after the turn of the century, there was a short secondary boom of hard rock mining that lasted until about 1910 and 1911.
And then, the gold finally became so hard to reach, and the payout wasn't as much as what it cost to develop it.
Nothing much happened because there was no easy gold to find anymore.
After that period, both towns essentially became ghost towns. There was 2 or 3 families that lived in Bonanza, and that was it. Until we reached a point during the Great Depression in which gold dredging had become very in vogue, and they began to look at the Yankee Fork as an area to dredge the valley floor. It was loud, it was very violent, it was shaky. They operated continuously, 24 hours a day in 3 shifts.
They could hear it for 5 miles on a good day, to wind the right direction, whatever. The men who worked on it had hearing loss in their old age, later years. My dad did. Most of the others did too.
A lot of people thought they lived on here, and that's one place you wouldn't want to live on. I mean, because it was noisy. It was very noisy.
It was noise you can't believe. And it shook, rattled, and rolled, and I had no desire to go on that thing.
The Yankee Fork Dredge was a colossal machine, 5 stories tall with 71 8-cubic-foot metal buckets. It had a steel girder frame, metal siding, twin marine diesel engines, cables and pulleys, and rock sorting machinery that pushed the entire dredge weight to 988 tons. At the time, it was one of the largest dredges in the lower 48 states. With muscle power like this, the dredge owners were confident gold was well within reach.
They core drilled this whole valley and estimated that there was $11 million worth of gold here. But the problem is the gold was at bedrock, and bedrock in this valley is somewhere between 30 and 35 feet.
A dredge is a large, typically a floating barge that uses a conveyor belt of shovels to scoop up large amounts of material, typically of lower ore grades, and collects the gold through redepositing all of the rock and material along a valley floor or bottom. Water had to constantly be feeding into the dredge so that it would continue to float, and it would dig its own pond out, and through the stacker, which exited through the rear, would create a systematic pattern of rock. And that pattern is called dredge tailings. It creates a series of rows. As the shovels dug, it would work in a pattern sweeping back and forth off of a pivot point, which was called the spud. It would rotate back and forth in a sweeping motion, creating a semi-concentric arc that would lay upon one another into these cornrows, sort of a pattern that we see today.
Continuous dredge operations required a 3-person crew and many support services. Outside of work, more than a dozen families lived at the dredge camp. They became the backbone of the community. Located just a few miles away, they thrived year-round and shared a unique lifestyle that is unmatched today.
Well, living in mining camps in general, it forges strong family bonds that last your whole life. You're really close as a family because you go every place and do everything together. The mine owner, he made all the rules. If you did not follow the rules, you were unemployed.
The dredge itself was an employment opportunity for my dad and to support his family. I mean, he came out from Kentucky dead broke, you know. When the dredge started operating, Dad applied for a job on the dredge and eventually got a job as the stern oiler in late 1940. Then he got promoted to bow oiler, which was another 5 cents an hour. And my dad was very good with equipment, and eventually they trained him as the winchman. Well, as a boy, I just remember, you know, having mostly an outdoor experience, you know. In the summer, we were fishing and hiking in the woods, and wintertime, we didn't have a ski lift, so we had toboggans that we used to haul up to the top of the mountain and then come whipping down on a toboggan.
People generally got along. When there was this remote, you have to be sort of somewhat dependent on each other. We went to Salmon River fall and loaded up on canned goods and dry goods like that. He made arrangements with a rancher down on the Salmon River for half a beef and half a pork a year. They also hunted and fished year-round.
We did a lot of hunting and fishing. In fact, as a family, you know, we lived a lot on wild game. Everything we harvested, we ate. We fished for salmon because they were very plentiful in those days when we grew up here. And my mother, you know, actually canned the salmon herself.
By the 1930s, Idaho had become the fourth largest gold producer in the United States, with dredges operating in several basins statewide. As gold prices rose, so did voices opposed to dredging.
Even during the time of dredging in the 40s and into the early 50s, some groups of the public were raising concern about its effects to the landscape.
In Boise, irrigators complained that silted waters could spoil crops and fill canals with residue. Anglers and fisheries managers cited harmful effects to fish and muck-laden rivers, drawing the attention of lawmakers in the region. Indigenous people objected to the destruction of natural ecological processes and that the mining activity limited their ability to exercise their treaty rights.
So when the gold mining came in, it affected us and eventually took us out of the area.
Public pressure cited damage to the Yankee Fork and other areas of the state, which brought the passage of the 1954 Dredge and Placer Mining Protection Act to restrict dredging. Similar bills in the 1970s aimed to regulate dredge activity to improve water quality standards and restore disturbed lands. Dredges like these were often described as tireless metal monsters devouring tons of gravel each day. In riverbeds and basins all over the state, dredge mining altered not just the surface, but the deep-seated human connections to the area.
I think I can put myself in the miner's shoes and understand that in order to get the resources he needed gold or some other resource. Conversely, in my shoes, we needed the land to produce fish, so that was the real gold of Yankee Fork.
The natural landscape of the Salmon River Basin yielded a rich bounty for the Shoshone and Bannock tribes, who made seasonal rounds to the Salmon River country, including the Yankee Fork, to hunt and gather plants.
I mean, we have a special tie to it because our people lived there for thousands and thousands of years, you know, inhabited that area.
Dating back to at least 8,000 to 12,000 years ago, we know that pre-contact people came through. We can see that through the archaeological evidence left behind on sites that are still here to this day.
We know that folks who lived here, came in seasonally. They were in small kind of extended family groups. It was a successful way of living. People did it successfully out here for 10,000 years.
Indigenous people traveled throughout the region following foods as they came into season. For example, some bands or small family groups would harvest camas roots in late spring and early summer, then travel from the Camas Prairie to the Salmon Mountains.
The Yankee Fork area is for our hunting of the salmon, the bighorn sheep. That's why our people are called Tukorekat and Agaidekat. My uncles and that, they were fishing up there a long time ago. My first time was there was when I got married in the 70s. One time this old man, he's gone now, and he talked about when he was a little boy of how they would go up to the salmon country and they would go up on wagon.
Places like Yankee Fork were really important fisheries for the Shoshone-Bannock people, and upwards of 20 to 60,000 fish were harvested annually in the salmon basin alone. Unfortunately, that habitat where the dredge occurred is probably some of the most important habitat for salmon and steelhead.
These two anadromous fish species are born in the fresh water of tributaries, migrate out to sea to spend most of their life, then return to their original headwaters to spawn and start the cycle over. Mining activities drastically altered the river channel, reducing the complexity, water quality, and hiding spots that fish need to thrive.
What I have heard is people were surprised at the devastation and just what had happened there. I think if I recall correctly, it was like a bomb had went off and it just was completely unnatural looking to them, and I think surprised a lot of the folks.
It impacted us, impacted the salmon runs in a very devastating way.
It disrupted ecosystem function and has had cascading impacts down in the food web, from the big salmon that return to the little invertebrates that are grazing on the rocks. My personal relationship with the Yankee Fork stems back to the early 1980s, and as a child I camped there, I fished there. At the end of the 80s we started fishing somewhere else, and it broke my heart because we had to pack up our camp in Yankee Fork, and I didn't realize it at the time, but that was really the last time that I fished salmon in the Yankee Fork with my dad. So I've lost a little bit of a personal relationship, but I filled that with a professional endeavor to really try to help recover salmon to Yankee Fork, so people could have an opportunity to hunt fish with their fathers and have that connection with my kids as well. But at this point, the numbers are so low that we generally fish somewhere else.
The work to enhance this critical fish habitat begun by the Shoshone-Bannock tribes in the 1980s is an ongoing process that is closely coupled to recent habitat work to help promote the recovery of ESA-listed Chinook salmon and steelhead. This has resulted in the removal of some tailings piles to reestablish more natural river channels and floodplains.
If we can do it in places where there's also places for spawning beds and juvenile rearing for these fish species that also are a part of the history in the past too. We've had a lot of success working with all the partners, and despite the difference in viewpoints, we've been able to make significant progress for both, perspectives of mining and for fish restoration.
The partnership between tribal, federal, and state agencies, environmental groups, and landowner J.R. Simplot Company demonstrates that the tailings piles and ecosystem restoration work can coexist. A mining legacy can be preserved, while high-priority spawning and rearing habitat can be improved for anadromous and resident fish.
Well, nature will bound back. It will take this over again someday. It's going to take it time. It's amazing. It only took them roughly 100 years or less to really destroy the Yankee Fork.
The Yankee Fork Gold Dredge stands today as a silent witness to a long-running mining legacy. The 5.5-mile stretch of tailings piles created by the dredge remind visitors that values about mining and natural resources have changed. The mounds of cornrow-style rock and cobble can inspire controversy, preserve the past, and serve as an example to future generations.
By leaving some of those dredge tailings intact and by having a broader story that includes the pioneers and the Shoshone-Bannock people's perspective, I think they can have a better understanding for what we can learn from that.
There's a large amount of tourists that come up to this valley, and they are interested in mining history. And they need to see those dredge piles to see what came out of that machine. I think people are passionate about history because it's how they identify who they are and where they're going. And whether that's an arrowhead or a mining pick or a dredge pile, people each identify where they came from and where they're headed.
Those tailings piles are a step back in time to see what these guys went through just to extract the gold.
The tailings piles, I think, represent a lot of different things. To the people in this community, folks, really take a lot of pride in, the development and the hard work that went into, mining on the Yankee Fork.
I view them as a part of history, and it's really a part of my own history of growing up here in the valley, because I watched these tailings coming out the back of that dredge as a young boy. So it's important that history is not only documented, but explained to people, and actually if we can show them history, because years from now when I'm long gone, there's going to be people that'll talk about it. And if you remove the evidence of history, then future generations won't have a clue of what happens.
Places like this where you can see what occurred in the past, the damage that was done. There's some people that appreciate these piles like this. I am personally not one of them, but there are people who do want to see these remain on the landscape. And I can agree to some extent that if we were to remove all of this so that people forgot what happened here, they would do it again.
To ignore it is to repeat it. If you just forget about it, that means you could almost get to the point where, oh, that never happened. And then you'll do it over again. But, the teaching is you're supposed to gain some knowledge from your mistakes.
I think the mining legacy in the Yankee Fork Valley has had both pros and cons, and it still does to this day. And I think it's an ongoing debate with mining or any resource extraction industry that we continue to have.
There is little doubt that the tailings in the Yankee Fork have shaped the area's mining legacy. The diverse and widespread cobbles remind visitors of the dredge's glory days. The specialized machines supported hard-working miners and their families, local communities, ambitious developers, and related industries following the Great Depression and post-World War II eras. As ecosystem and stream enhancement work helps to heal the river, the dredge piles outside the restoration area will remain intact. Visitors and future generations will be able to view our unique shared history and landscape with greater understanding of the past in the Yankee Fork Valley.